Welcome to Paul Weiss Waking Up with AI, a podcast from Paul Weiss featuring your host, Katherine Forrest. The only update you need on AI policy, law, and governance starts now.
Welcome back to Paul Weiss Waking Up with AI. I'm Katherine Forrest.
And I'm Scott Caravello.
And Scott, I have to confess to you that I don't even need to confess it to you because you know about this. You're here in real time with me. You're not an interactive deepfake. But we're recording this thing after lunch, and this raises a variety of interesting issues during both the holiday season, the New Year's season, which is food come in really strange colors. I mean, have you noticed that? Like in the holiday season, the colors change.
Oh, especially in the cafeteria here. I think they do a good job of getting with the season.
Yeah, green shows up in strange places. I'm not talking about salad. I'm talking about things that aren't normally green. But anyway, so today, believe you me, this is going to actually sync up with what we're talking about. But today I had a red velvet whoopie pie. And for any of our audience listeners who've not had a red velvet whoopie pie, I have to say you're missing one of the great delicacies in life. You may think it's caviar, but I'm telling you, it's a red velvet whoopie pie. And, so this is a holiday specialty. You don't see red velvet whoopie pies most times of year, but I had one today. And so if I'm a little slower on the uptake, I just want to tell you that's the cause. So there it is.
All that said, so 2 weeks ago, we promised to follow up on our conversation on interactive deepfakes.
Right. We had, as the audience may recall, for those of you who follow along on a regular basis, we had the December 11th executive order from the White House on AI. And we really wanted to do an episode on that, pretty much right away, since it impacts a lot of people's planning for their companies in the coming months and year. So we are now going to go back and do this episode today on how to try and determine whether or not you have an interactive deepfake on your hand. And we talked about the interactive deepfakes and how they're kind of alarming and that they are deepfakes that can respond and adjust in real time. They're not just videos that are static where it's me saying something I never said or some public figure saying something that they never said. It's actually, you can think of it as looking like real people who are on potentially even like a Teams call or a Zoom call or a WebEx call, and they look like they are the people that you know and trust, but in fact, all but you might be a deepfake. And so this has happened. It's not stuff of science fiction. And, it places us in a world where we end up with a shift that has been called zero trust evidence. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to sort of talk about the second part of that today.
Yeah, and just as a reminder, because I know we had covered it in depth last time, but the zero trust concept refers to the fact that you can't presume that media is authentic. And that's because of the sophistication of deepfakes.
Right, exactly. And so let's talk about the state of deepfake detection at the end of 2025, because it used to be you could count 6 fingers on the hand, or, somebody would have an arm coming out of their back, or it would look sort of a little bit weird. And, every once in a while you still run into a few of those things that are obvious tells of a deepfake. But right now, things have gotten really sophisticated in terms of deepfake technology and interactive deepfake technology in particular. So let's just say, and cutting to the chase, it's hard to figure out whether or not something is a deepfake. There is no single, silver bullet. There's no single tool that you can plug into your phone and have it run against videos that you're watching to determine whether or not something is a deepfake. So, you have to go to a variety of techniques and different technologies, and it's really, in some ways, like whack-a-mole.
Yeah, and part of the reason for that is just because there are so many different kinds of deepfakes, and they are driven by different techniques to actually generate them.
Right, and in response, there has to be an equally sophisticated and robust set of ways to detect them. And there are 2 things that I would say are emerging as essential. The first is real-time verification that what you're watching is, in fact, not only in real time, but also real. It's real in real time. And authentication, indicia of authenticity. And, having some sort of proof attached to the content so that you can actually trust it later that what you're watching is authentic.
Yeah. And so, these strategies work together, right? But they're part of then what we would call a tech stack. And that's a general term, not limited to this conversation. But what we mean by that is a combination of tools. And so these verification and authentication measures can work together within an organization or a tool to help detect the deepfakes.
Right. So let's start with a real-time detection piece.
Sounds great.
Okay, so the industry has pushed towards real-time or near real-time detection. And let's consider it in connection with sort of a live video and sort of these video and voice calls, which are particular instances that we discussed last time and that create really very significant fraud risk and just sort of like creep out risk, right? Going to be on a video call and you're wondering whether you're actually the only human on the screen. And in that context, we have innovative methods for real-time verification, including something that's called a micro challenge.
And so a micro challenge is another one of those things that it sounds like, which is an immediate digital request for verification. And it's kind of like the deepfake video version of a CAPTCHA that we see around the internet all the time.
Right, exactly. And in fact, in one approach, which is validated by the European Symposium on Security and Privacy, which goes by the easy-to-say acronym Euro-S&P. It's called a Generative Output Test for Challenge Human Authentication, or GOTCHA. So it's directly and truly picking up on the CAPTCHA equivalent. And up to now, it's been mostly used for research and non-commercial use rather than being put inside of a commercialized tool that you and I could download from the App Store, and instead, it's available through GitHub. These gotchas present simple but really carefully chosen challenges to try and detect an interactive deepfake. And for instance, it requires a person or a deepfake to do a head rotation at a specified angle, like, turn your head 90 degrees, or not 90 degrees, that would be weird. Wait, that would be so weird. Turn your head 360 degrees. But anyway, turn your head at a specific angle or requiring movements like putting your hand over your eye. And then the gotcha uses these tests to try to find issues because deepfakes actually have a harder time than humans do in responding in real time to some of these physical micro challenges.
Yeah, and so as much as I love that name, gotcha, it's not like these are trick questions or strange tasks where someone is, really going to say, gotcha, right? It's looking at normal and run-of-the-mill aspects of the video in order to test parts of deepfake generation that can still lead to inconsistencies, notwithstanding how advanced the technology has become. And so then I think if we're still going to stay in sort of research land, there's another developing approach that's worth discussing, and that's what's called active probing.
Right, and that's actually a close cousin to the challenge response framework of gotcha.
And I think that this one is really cool.
It really is. It's active probing, and it really sort of flips the script. Instead of asking the user to move to measure how they do in response to a challenge, the detection system subtly changes the environment in a measured way, and then it watches, if you will, for expected physical responses from the human or the potential deepfake.
Yeah, so one version uses illuminations like the screen flashing or putting off a patterned hue to then see how the subject's facial reflections track. And then another method watches corneal reflections, which are, the tiny glints of light on the surface of the eyes. And the reason that that's helpful is because for real people, the reflections should be nearly identical since both of your eyes are looking at the same thing on the screen from very similar angles. And so, it's a really granular detail, but because of that, it's something that's a little more difficult for the deepfake generator to mirror, and therefore can be an indication of whether or not it is in fact fake.
Right. So both techniques raise the bar for imposters, but those are in research land still.
Yeah, and if we then start thinking about commercial deployment, I'm specifically thinking of the gotcha technique, there are some practical drawbacks that you could come up with. Imagine if we were getting on a video call and in every single meeting, you had to make each person on each side of the screen go through 30 seconds of facial aerobics to prove that they're actually a real person.
It would prevent people from actually not turning on their cameras, right?
This is true.
Seriously, for higher stake interactions, whether it be board meetings or authorizing payments above a certain threshold, the sort of know your customer inquiries or job interviews, maybe if you've had some other indication that the person isn't who you think they are, you might have that kind of gotcha micro challenge request, but it's not, I think, really realistic. Can you imagine getting on like a call for an RFP for a new client pitch and having to say twist your head around and, flare a nostril, or can you raise an eyebrow or wiggle your ears and things like that? I mean, I think that's not really a realistic sort of commercial proposition.
Totally. But that being said, maybe it would make sense to then move on to some of the commercially available products.
Right. So one of the ideas is that no one wants to give their secrets away to attackers. So the information that you can get about the commercial products to detect the deepfakes, the interactive deepfakes in particular, is somewhat limited. They're not putting out system cards that go into long explanations of exactly how these detection tools work. But we can talk about, and we'll talk about, sort of two tools where there is some information out there on them, at least about what they're doing. One is called Reality Defender, and the other one is called Sensity, Sensity AI. And so Reality Defender offers real-time detection for audio, video, and images, and it includes meeting-focused screening. And it actually does integrate with Teams and with Zoom, which is kind of a big deal when you think about it, because it means that there are some tools that are now being made available and rolled out where people actually have to meet and you want some form of verification.
Yeah, and then so Sensity AI, which also integrates with Teams, but I don't think it integrates with Zoom, at least so far as I know. But they advertise a number of different technologies that make up its deepfake detection solution. And so that includes pixel level analysis that pick up on inconsistencies that are in the video that are then basically giving away that facial manipulation has occurred. And so, as I keep talking about that, it makes me realize that we haven't actually talked that much about audio so far. But that's also a really key part of the equation too, because no matter how realistic the video is, the audio has to match and also seem realistic for these deepfakes to be succeeding. And so therefore, it's a really important part of detection. And so some of these commercial solutions like Sensity are also picking up unnatural sound patterns.
Right. And the audio piece is so important because when we do trust, it's often based on both visual and audible detection that we are picking up as humans. We're looking at a video, we're listening to the video, and we trust what we hear. And so it's interesting. So we put these two things together and we just implicitly trust. So there is a commercial tool, another commercial tool, it's called Pin Drop, that detects deepfake audio by listening for things that are outside of the range of human hearing. They are also looking for, and this is a little bit sort of funny, but for what they call liveness cues, which are indications, sort of like in biometric security, that actually indicates whether somebody is alive. And you might be looking, for instance, at signals that are being played from a speaker than from a live human voice.
Right. And so then there's also the developer-specific detection tools that we've seen or that we will see coming out, and those tie into state regulation. So there's California's SB 942, which, Katherine, I think you talked about on the first deepfake episode, but that comes into effect on January 1st, and it would require the developers of certain AI systems to not only include latent or hidden disclosures in their synthetic outputs, but also to make freely available a detection tool which a user can use to feed output into and then be told whether the developer's AI is responsible for the generation.
Right. And so when we talk about SB 942, which is this California law, I just want to harken back to our last episode on the executive order from December 11th and remind our listeners that any of the laws that are currently passed and actually in effect or going into effect and have not been challenged in some way or are not yet specifically preempted, those laws are still good laws. So don't ignore those laws, right? This is going to be sort of a step-by-step process. SB 942's latent watermarking approach, it really is gaining traction, and there are very sophisticated methods that are out there. But another really interesting approach is something called Deep Forge Seal, and that's all one word. Deep Forge, DEEP, capital FORGE, and then capital SEAL. And why do they have to do that? Why do they have to run like three words together like that? Deep Forge Seal. And it's what's referred to as a, quote, semi-fragile, end quote, watermark. And it relies on AI that is trained to make the watermark remain intact when an image is the subject of a benign common operation like image compression that happens as a matter of course when you're sharing something. But when the video is used in a way that suggests tampering, then the watermark is designed to fail. And that would occur when sort of deep fake image generation and alteration takes place.
Yeah, and so you might insert this watermark into real, authentic media. And then, right, I think the idea, Katherine, is that you'd be able to later then tell if it's been manipulated by a malicious actor.
Right. It would be a proactive defense. But we should mention that Deep Forge Seal is also, right now, it's not yet sort of commercially deployed, but it's an interesting proposition.
Totally. And, so then just connecting this back to our conversation last time about authentication in the courts, because deepfakes create an issue for authenticity when you're actually putting something in front of a court. This seems like the type of concept, though, that could actually be really helpful there.
Right, completely. And, it's something that would really need to be tried and true method before people really can sort of rely on it and before it would be adopted as something which is a recommended method of authenticating something. But it certainly would be helpful.
Totally. So on that note, I think we should also mention the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, or the C2PA standard. And we want to mention that because it's really become the standard for cryptographically signed metadata. And so putting that in much more plainly understandable language, it means that you can embed information in video, images, or audio in order to provide a digital history.
Right. And like the discussion of what AI developers are doing, it's helpful information. But if I'm a bad guy looking to pass off a deepfake as real, I'm seeking out a tool that does not embed this kind of information inside the digital paper trail, right? So it's not a silver bullet. And those other real-time detection techniques remain important lines of defense that some of which, as we know, are deployed and some of which we're hoping will be deployed.
Yeah, and then I think that the last thing that I would sort of mention here is just that these are really a sample of tools and techniques that are out there. And, they're a notable set, but we don't mean to say that this is the full universe. And, this field is going to continue to develop as the deepfake generation technology develops in step. And so with that said, Katherine, any closing thoughts?
Just that this is a complicated area where we're going to be playing whack-a-mole for a while. This is trust in a whole variety of ways is put at issue with different kinds of new technologies. And with some of these deepfakes, we've got some real issues that are going to come into play. And so it's going to be a tug of war between fraudsters and legitimate businesses and civil society. And we're going to be trying to find the right kinds of tools that are going to be lasting and that are going to be really useful and accessible, financially accessible to people. So that's where we are.
Well, that's a semi-positive note to put out in the middle of the holiday season.
I just want to say I'm ready for the red-colored whoopie pies to be taken away from me because I cannot hold myself back. So, if I've put out a nice little sort of note for the holiday season of the ability to detect deepfakes. That's a good thing. The fact that the interactive deepfakes are so creepy is a bad thing. But in all events, that's all we've got time for today. I'm Katherine Forrest.
And I'm Scott Caravello. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thanks for listening to Paul Weiss Waking Up with AI. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app to stay up to date on the latest in AI policy, law, and governance. For more information on Paul Weiss, go to our website at www.paulweiss.com.